All right, I think we pretty much have everyone here. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know a couple folks still might be rolling in, but that's just okay. We're going to start with some welcome remarks before we get going on our presentations today. So first of all, good afternoon and welcome everyone to the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia's final Global Smarts Mentoring Program Friday session. I want to extend a special welcome to the council colleagues that are joining us today, also any board members and supporters that are joining us for today's session. We've been meeting with this year's cohort every Friday since January, with the exception of breaks, of course, for our 2-hour professional development sessions. And these sessions have provided both our St. Joseph's University and Temple University mentors with the tools, materials, and skills needed to work with their students as they progress through the council's 5-month junior Model UN program. So admittedly, this Friday looks and feels a lot different than the majority of our Friday meetings, which we typically hold at the council's headquarters in Center City. Since mid-March and directly following the Junior Model UN Prep Conference, the coronavirus pandemic has certainly changed all of our lives, as the shift to distance learning has meant that all of our mentors have not had the chance to personally, physically lead their weekly sessions at our Global Smarts Mentoring School sites. We have been thoroughly impressed and quite frankly inspired by the work that these mentors have continued to do in the midst of such a drastic new normal. From crafting lesson plans to sending activities, also drafting letters written to students, encouraging videos. I've been extremely impressed by the work that this group has done. It's been really a joy to witness. I will also say that today's final presentations will give all of our guests a brief glimpse into the Global Smarts Mentoring Program. We're very much looking forward to these presentations. We're also very much looking forward to the Q&A that will follow each presentation. And we'll get started in just a few minutes. So before we begin, if you're joining us, you're under no obligation to share your screen or your microphone. So feel free, if you want to, keep your screen muted, your microphone muted until it comes time for the Q&A. If you want to leave your video on, you're welcome to do so. We ask that the Global Smarts mentors that are here prepare to share their screens and microphones once their presentations come up in the schedule. So before we begin, I want to invite my colleague and literally right-hand woman, Shanti Panza, to say a couple of quick words and go over some logistical notes before we begin. I do want to just flip very quickly for everyone to the agenda so you can all see how today's session is going to flow. So following our welcome remarks and housekeeping, all of our groups will have, like I said, 5 to 7 minutes for presentations, and then we'll have about 2 to 3 minutes for Q&A. Shanti will go over some of those logistics in just a second. And then at the very end of today's session, we'll have a little bit of time with just the mentors for final evaluations and some closing remarks. And then at that time, any observers that are on our meeting today are more than welcome to leave the session. You can stay on until 4:30 if you want to, but by the end of the last presentation, you're welcome to then leave the session. Okay, so I'm gonna now turn it over to Shanti.
Thank you, Kristen. My name is Shanti Panza. I'm the Education Coordinator for the World Affairs Council. I've had the pleasure of working with the Global Smart students over the course of the semester, and I also echo Kristen's comments completely. Before we begin, I just want to go over a few quick logistical notes. Note that if at any time you are experiencing any technical difficulties, you can send me a direct message using the chat feature. You can also send me a text or email. My information is on the calendar note for this meeting. Everyone can choose to keep your microphone and video muted over the course of today's meeting. We will ask that as each mentoring group presents, the students unmute their screens and microphones as needed. Each group will have 5 to 7 minutes for their presentation before we break into a quick Q&A. We encourage our mentors and guests to ask questions of the presenters. Kristen will let you know when it is time to do so. And you can use the raise hand feature as well as the chat to do that. Thanks again so much for joining us, and I will turn it back over to Kristen for some brief housekeeping before we dive into these amazing presentations.
Thank you so much, Shanti. Really appreciate that. So just a quick note for our mentors. The very last assignment actually that you have due for the program is our speaker events write-up. So I did just want to go over the very last speaker events that we have planned in terms of webinars for the next week or two. As you all know, on April 27th, we will be having a webinar called How to Hold a National Election During a Time of Pandemic. Highly recommend that you all join us for this very timely discussion. Also, we'll have How to Lead in the Time of a Pandemic on April 30th. And finally, on May 12th, we'll have Will COVID-19 Make the Putin Regime in Russia Ill or Immune? Another very timely discussion focusing on Russia and coronavirus. So that's going to be on May 12th. I know by this time, a lot of you will have done your final presentations and such, but we still highly encourage you to participate in our webinars. You all know the information on how to register, and we hope to virtually see you there at these programs. So without further ado, I now want to turn it over to our first group for today. We're going to start with the group from St. Mary's Interparochial School.
All right, give me 1 second. I'll pull it up right now.
Yeah, take your time. And once again, if anyone has any questions throughout the presentation, as Shanti said a second ago, you can use the chat feature to send a message to the whole group. Or if you want to contact Shanti and I directly, just hit where it says everyone and make sure that you're sending it to Kristen or Shanti. And then when the time comes, I'll let you all know for questions. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to our group from St. Mary's for our first presentation this afternoon.
Hi, so when Sarah, Omu, and I were trying to decide our topic, we definitely wanted to incorporate one of the two major focuses of Global Smarts this year, which is aiding refugees and displaced people and climate change. But we also knew that wouldn't really be possible without referencing the coronavirus pandemic. So we decided to do how coronavirus threatens
I can't hear you, Molly. Sorry, what were you saying? No, I can't hear you at all.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. Sorry.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Oh my goodness.
No, I'm sorry, guys.
I was just saying that when the three of us, Sarah and I, decided, we're trying to decide on a topic, we definitely wanted to incorporate one of the two major focuses of Global Smarts this year, which is aiding refugees and displaced people and the coronavirus. So that's how we led to how COVID-19 threatens refugees, because we didn't really think we'd be able to address aiding refugees and displaced people while also talking about the coronavirus. And then these are just the main points that we're going to hit in our PowerPoint today.
So I'm going to be talking about, Molly, sorry, that's yours.
Okay, so like I said, we're just gonna talk about the coronavirus, and I'm assuming that all of you are already aware of what coronavirus is and how it definitely is a threat to all populations and every individual. But we just wanted to emphasize that refugees are particularly vulnerable to the coronavirus due to the situations that they're currently in.
So now I'm going to be talking about the impact of the COVID-19 worldwide and how it has impacted every society socially, economically, and also diplomatically and politically. The social aspect is very alarming, and the most vulnerable branch of the societies that are affected are the refugees, the migrants, and the underdeveloped countries because they don't have access to running water, like health supplies, and they also need to go out to reach for income and try to feed their families. And the COVID-19 has also increased like xenophobia against Chinese and inequalities and exclusion toward these vulnerable groups. And even we have seen an increase in domestic violence against women due to the lockdown in many countries. The economic impact has been also very tremendous. The SP 500 has fell 17% since February 9th, and it has also stopped the 11-year bull market progress that we have been seeing since 2008. It has also had an impact on the Chinese production, the supply chain. It has disrupted almost every global market present, and it's almost called as a financial crisis that is coming. And some experts think that it might be very recessionary in the next few months. And when it comes to the diplomatic and political aspects, the COVID-19 has affected like many international relations and caused diplomatic tensions between China and like Western, like United States and even African countries. And yeah, and it has created like tension around trade and transport of medicine, diagnostic tests, and hospital equipment. And every nation is almost looking for like a scapegoat to put the fault on with what is happening right now. So, and when it comes to numbers, the numbers are also very alarming in the United States. As of 7:05 p.m. when we did the presentation on Wednesday, there was almost like 800,000 cases. Bangladesh, the countries that Sarah was researching on, has almost 300,000 cases. France, the one I was doing my research on, had almost 120,000 cases. So the cases are increasing like very quickly in most of these countries, even if they're developed. And numbers again, many countries have taken great measures, let's say it, with the funds available and what they're dedicating to fighting the COVID-19 right now. And even the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have taken action and giving fund to like other like struggling countries and with like very weak economies.
So now we're going to go into undocumented workers and how the federal government is helping them, and also what type of situation that immigrants and undocumented workers are going through during this time. So we found that with the impact of coronavirus on U.S. immigrants and undocumented workers, it was actually really mind-opening, just because with the CARES Act and loss of income, a lot of immigrants and undocumented workers are not given those same federal assistance that some U.S. workers are given. And also, undocumented workers do not qualify for unemployment. And also, immigrants and undocumented workers attribute to 4.6 of the economy in the U.S. And problems they experience, when I was reading about this one family, their biggest concern was having enough to pay for food, medical bills, and different things like that. And they were talking about how they are unable to shop at places that some of us are able to shop at, like Costco, because you have to have like a membership card, and you can only have that if you have a proof of identification in the US. And so they don't have a lot of access to things that we necessarily do have access to and wouldn't even think about sometimes. And I definitely didn't even think about this until reading articles and different stories on immigrants and undocumented workers in the US. And to sum it up, their voices are left out of this important conversation. And so moving forward and looking how we can make them part of the conversation moving forward with COVID.
So like Omu said, like so many different nations across the entire world have like taken steps to try and stop the spread of COVID-19. And one of those has been temporarily suspending resettlement travel, meaning like the actual travel of a refugee from their initial country of asylum to the country where they're supposed to resettle is suspended. And I just think it's really important to note that like some of these individuals who have had like their travel suspended were supposed to be like going to resettle in a country that their family already is, and they're kind of just in like a standstill because like they don't really know like what's going on, which none of us do. It's like definitely such a developing situation, but it's like particularly difficult for them because they're miles away from their family in like a terrible location that they're like that they need to like get away from, that they currently can. And then like going off of that, it's just like super important to like realize that like the refugees living in refugee camps are particularly vulnerable to outbreaks of COVID-19 due to the high population density and poor medical infrastructure of those camps. Like I referenced in like some of these like points, like Greece in particular was like the first refugee camp to test positive for the coronavirus, and since then they have like gone under quarantine. But like other camps like across the nation, like including Bangladesh, are like trying their hardest to ensure that like the coronavirus doesn't make way into the camps, but because they don't necessarily like have the funds to supply the camps with sanitation materials, and because there's so many people in the camps. I know in Bangladesh there's a camp of about 1 million people, and it's like in a like situation like that. You're muted, Sarah.
Of course I am. Sorry, guys. So looking at COVID's impact on Bangladesh and their response, you're looking at Bangladesh is home to one of the largest garment industries in the world. And so you have a collapse of that, and that has left many people in Bangladesh unable to go to work. And 90% of people in Bangladesh are actually a part of the informal sector. And according to an article I read about the World Bank, it states that only 15% of people in Bangladesh make more than 500 taka, which is equivalent to almost $6 in the US. And Bangladesh is a little different than the US in that they only have 432 ICU beds. And so that's why the World Bank has fast-tracked $100 million to help Bangladesh during the pandemic, and also their resources with doctors. Like, for example, Italy has 4.1 doctors per 1,000 patients, whereas in Bangladesh, it's only 0.5 doctors per 1,000 patients.
So when it comes to the impact of the COVID-19 in France and the response, first of all, France's the number of cases and deaths and recoveries are increasing at an average of 1.03% every day in France. And the companies like the United States, the French state had also offered like temporary compensation for unemployment and the deferral of direct tax and social security contributions. The French government has requisitioned all stocks and production of surgical masking, protective mask in France, so they will be exclusively dedicated to the medical use. And as the initial 15 days lockdown announced by the President Macron in March 17 has been prolonged to May 11th. And French also has a special case, not as Bangladesh, but before the COVID-19, they only had 5,000 ICU units with ventilator, and since then they have increased it to 8,000. But even with all that, they had to transfer some of their patients to neighboring countries such as Germany, Luxembourg, and Switzerland. So. And this is a quote that I found on The Guardian about a 16-year-old Sudanese refugees in France, speaking of how the conditions.
So, in noting like my respective country, which is the UAE, I think it's like particularly important to note that they have a population significantly smaller than the US, but that they like are ensuring that like tests for the coronavirus are made available to everyone. Like I said, they do prioritize testing people who show symptoms or those exposed to others with the virus, including senior citizens and people with underlying health conditions. But they do ensure that others can be tested if they want to for a fee. And to ensure social distancing, they have opened government drive-through test centers. But more importantly, I feel like they've taken like a huge step to eliminate like any travel into any of the Emirates by ensuring that like airlines in the UAE will not allow any incoming passengers. And finally, I just wanted to note that they're taking it really seriously because that will have at least a $17.7 billion contribution to the national economy, which is like obviously a completely like negative impact, but like they're doing it to ensure that like the citizens of their Emirates are like as safe as possible. So yeah.
And finally, this is a quote from the President Macron, and we thought it was really important to put it at the end when he says, "We are at war, a healthcare war. We are not fighting an army, nor are we fighting another nation, but the army is here, invisible, elusive, and it progresses. It does require a general call of arms." So you wanted to end on that note.
Yeah. Thank you so much, you guys, for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your presentation. And I just want to provide a little bit of context to those that are joining us on today's session. So every year for the Junior Model UN program, all of the Junior Model UN students, including the Global Smart students and mentors, are assigned not just a country to represent, but one of two topics to research. This year's topics were combating climate change and protecting and aiding refugees and displaced people. So obviously in the midst of a global health pandemic, we're forced to think about a lot of these issues in the sense of how coronavirus is impacting them. And that's what this group chose to do by focusing on COVID-19 and vulnerable populations, the refugee topic that they were assigned. So now we'll turn it over to questions from anyone who would like to ask questions of our presenters. Again, you can use the raise hand feature, or you can type your question in the chat. This also goes for our mentors as well. If you want to ask questions of your peers, you can do so as well. Any questions? I'll ask one question. One of the things that our department does in assigning you all countries is looking at the issues and seeing which countries would be easy to research, not just for you all, but for your students. So I'm curious, I know Molly, you represented the UAE and Sarah represented Bangladesh. Was it difficult or not so difficult to find good resources, particularly for these countries in relation to the refugees topic?
I feel like it's just like there's a very limited number of sources. So there's like maybe like one or two websites that I used, but that had like numerous articles on it. So I used like Al Jazeera, and then I think
Oh, I think we're having some connectivity issues, Molly. I apologize. Maybe if you wouldn't mind, could you type your response in the chat for us?
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And Sarah, would you like to comment?
Yeah, so with Bangladesh, it was really hard to find some information. They have a lot of refugees coming from Myanmar. And so I read like a lot of like testimonials, because like it was weird. Like I looked up Bangladesh, like, and like refugees and different stuff, and it brought me to like a Facebook page. And then it brought me to all these different testimonies. And I was like, this is like so cool. Like I can, like, it's so much more personable, like hearing these different types of stories. And it really is heartbreaking, just because Bangladesh just doesn't have a good fixed capacity to accommodate people who are getting more and more sick from coronavirus. So I'm thankful that like the World Bank and like different organizations or like people in Bangladesh have been donating to help during this crisis. But yeah, it's great.
That's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Okay, I'll ask that you guys stop your screen share now so we can transition to our next group. Thank you so much. And it looks like next up we have a presentation from the mentors at Hope Partnership for Education and also Blessed Trinity Regional Catholic School. So we'll give them a second to pull up their presentation. I'm looking at the chat right now as well. Yeah, that's a really good point, Lee. Thank you so much for asking that. Yeah, absolutely. How did you determine the amount of funds spent on fighting the virus itself, in particular the amount spent in the UK seemed very low? Does anyone from that last group want to chime in on that question real quick before we transition to Hope?
Do we have to pull up again the numbers?
No, you don't have to pull it up again if you just want to comment on the question.
Yeah, so I think with that, it's so like similar to the US, you have like an emergency fund like during these pandemics and crisis. So it depends on like how many resources and also like how many departments within that government is allocated to funding like these types of crises. So that's mainly where we got the numbers from, and like usually from sites like the World Bank or reports from UK or Madrid websites in general. Sorry if that answers your question. If not, send me another chat and I'll try to answer it more eloquently.
I guess it's also because of the impact. Like the more the country is impacted, the more you dedicate to fighting it. So.
Right, exactly. Thank you, Molly, for adding that as well. Okay, so I'll turn it over now to our mentors from Hope and Blessed Trinity. Take it away.
Okay, so we'll just briefly introduce ourselves, but my name is Alessandra Stifo, and I worked with the students representing Italy at Hope Partnership.
My name is McKenna, and I worked at Blessed Trinity, and my country was the Dominican Republic.
I'm Amanda Mewborn, and I worked at Hope Partnership with the delegates of Mexico.
And so when we were deciding our topic, we really wanted to see more of the concrete resolutions of the topics we were studying, mainly climate change and aiding refugees. So we will be presenting on policies and projects that we found in our countries that attempt to either resolve the issues within these countries or set themselves as trailblazers for global issues. So in Italy, we see, just to give some background on the climate change situation there, we see a rapid increase in extreme weather events. Of the 148 weather events experienced in 2018, around 33 occurred just in Rome, and Rome was considered the location with the highest risk for flood damage in all of Europe. As we can see from some more of the statistics there, it's just really damaging the Italian state and people. There have been some initiatives in the past. The country has a long history of promoting sustainable energy and practices, mainly because they have a really solid foundation in hydroelectric power. They have also signed on to the Paris Agreement in 2015. However, that is largely non-binding, so it's kind of hard to measure the impacts within the policy there. In 2017, they signed on to the anti-coal agreement, which commits Italy to ending the production of coal and the use of coal by 2030, but again, that is non-binding. So the most concrete example we see of policy that will change the future of Italy potentially is their push for climate change education. This push comes from the current Minister of Education, Lorenzo Fioramonti, who says, "I want to make the Italian education system the first education system that puts environment and society at the core of everything we learn in school." So with this example, we see Italy trying to make itself a trailblazer in climate change policy across the world. The basic makeup of the actual law includes mandatory climate change education in every single year of education. So that's from K to 12, basically, in Italian public schools and charter schools. This includes 33 hours of schooling on sustainability. So that factors out to about an hour per week of the total school year. It's taught in other classes. So you learn about math, sciences, politics, history in relation to climate change, making it more relatable and more understandable and concrete to the students. And this policy and this curriculum will go into effect this upcoming September. So we'll see how that goes, but I have a lot of faith in it due to the amount of young Italians that are highly interested in climate change and making the world a better place.
Okay, so since my country is Mexico, I thought it was only natural to go with the refugee topic and immigration. So some statistics is that there was a 95.4 decrease in the number of refugees granted asylum from 1990 to 2020. And there's like a time from 1992 to 1993 where the drop was incredibly significant. Like if you see the graph, it's larger than any of the drops in number of refugees granted asylum up to now. And an agreement has been made with the US for increased border protection and letting asylum seekers wait on the Mexican side of the border. This comes with some terms that the US has made for Mexico that don't really help it in any sort of way. Mexico does face problems when looking at aiding refugees. The Refugee Commission is severely understaffed when looking at it in relation to the large number of asylum seekers who enter the country. President Obrador has also cut the National Refugee Commission's budget this year to $1.2 million, which is the lowest allotment it's had in 7 years. And there's also inadequate conditions in these immigrant detention centers. Some centers are reported to have incredibly unsanitary conditions, and punishments are carried out often. Some actions, though, that Mexico has taken is that they provide a service that they call humanitarian visas, and they're available for those who meet the requirement of fleeing extreme violence. But the issue with that is that a lot of violence that refugees face if they're trying to go to the United States is law enforcement officers at the southern border mostly, or in southern areas, are the ones who perpetrate the most violence towards these refugees. So for them to get these visas, they sort of have to be attacked or have violence done towards them from the country that they're trying to seek help from. They have also signed the 1951 Refugee Convention and the 1967 Protocol. So I just wanted to talk about like the overall more in detail, I guess. Obrador's administration, Obrador's administration has affirmed that it will respect the rights of migrants traveling in its territory while promoting a joint response to migration flows focused on shared responsibilities and actions by governments in Central America, Mexico, and the United States. He also stated that he aims to combat immigration into Mexico by tackling the economic root itself of where these immigrants are coming from and what like economic hardships they're facing where they feel that they have to leave their countries. He has also come into contact with the Trump administration about increasing investment in Central America. However, this investment is dependent upon whether the Trump administration deems Mexico's efforts at curbing immigration into the United States as adequate enough. And social aid came from humanitarian visas, which allowed immigrants to live and work in Mexico for at most a year, giving these visas out was incredibly successful for the country. However, it was in a way too successful because they were giving out too many, and so they had to limit it to what the requirements are now, which is the recipient must have experienced extreme violence, and they are also asking governments of other countries, other Central American countries, to request these visas to bring into their own, and then have refugees request it from their governments rather than asking Mexico directly.
So with the Dominican Republic, Climate Links, which is a knowledge portal for the US AID, they have listed the country as the 11th most vulnerable to climate change. This is particularly true because of their geographical location and because they're an island nation. And this is also on top of their already frequent climate-related hazards such as floods, mudslides, and severe storms, and especially in the southern parts of the country, which suffer frequent droughts, especially. But with the effects of climate change and the high greenhouse gas emissions, the Dominican Republic is especially prone to devastating risks to coastal communities, agricultural production, water sources, human health, especially because of the high temperatures, which allows disease to spread among communities. And within the country, a large amount of the population, up to 30%, lives below the poverty line. So especially populations that live on the Haitian-Dominican border. So a lot of the Haitian refugees that come to the Dominican Republic also escape climate-related disasters. So they are some of the most vulnerable population for the risks of climate change. And what the Dominican Republic has done to kind of actively reduce all these negative impacts of climate change is by working closely with international organizations. Particularly, they signed the Paris Agreement in 2016, which we all know is one of the largest international committee ever held, with the largest amount of signatures from different countries. And with this, a byproduct of this agreement was the Nationally Determined Contribution Partnership, or the NDC partnership under this agreement. So what the NDC does is they make sure every country that signed the Paris Agreement kind of follow up every 5 years to make sure they're keeping their promise to work toward their sustainable development goals, making sure they work toward cleaner energy sources, more environmentally friendly methods in general implemented in the society. You know, the Dominican Republic has already made drastic changes to transportation, to agricultural production, the way they handle their tourism sector, and also safekeeping important ecological life on the island, such as marine life. So these are very important with in order to reduce the levels of greenhouse gas emissions and further reduce the effects of climate change.
So to conclude, we'll just be going over the major takeaways we each got from the policy changes in our countries. Since mine is largely focused on the education of young people, I kind of see this trend of focusing on young people as the future leaders and shapers of the world. largely because specifically with climate change, they'll be the ones most affected by it in the future. And because the younger generations have access to materials and social media that may play a major part in creating policies in the future. So I believe that as we move forward in crafting global policies and or programs that address global issues, we have to focus on including younger people in the discourse and in the formation of policy.
So what I got from my research that I did was that safe conditions for refugees are possible, and the way of doing this can be seen in some of Mexico's immigrant policies. However, cooperation between countries is crucial to ensure everyone has adequate resources while also aiming to tackle the root of the problem.
What I took from this is the importance of having this international network between countries, which the United Nations has worked really hard to achieve this kind of interconnected system where every country has their voice and they can work toward a better future. And it's really unfortunate that countries with a lot of influence, like the United States, pull out of important treaties that work toward combating climate change, because we kind of all need to work on this together in order to ensure that we kind of beat this thing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to the group from Hope Partnership and Blessed Trinity. We have time for one question if anyone has one. You can use the chat feature to do so, and then I'll ask the next group to start pulling up their presentation as well. Next, we have our group from Amy James Martin sharing their presentation with us. Okay, Amy James Martin, take it away. Oh, I just saw Aaron's question. It just popped up. Thanks, Aaron. So Aaron had a question, and I guess that's directed to Alessandra. When did Italy begin planning their education policy, and how do you think this will be?
So Italy just got, so the Minister of Education came in, I think maybe 2 years ago, after the Salvini government was moving out, and we see with the Salvini government a lot of pullback on progressive policies towards refugees and climate change. So I would say officially the planning started like once a new government was in and they brought in scientific experts in like 2018 and into 2019 and 2020. But I would also say that the current Minister of Education brought it in, so I don't know when he started it. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think the official answer is 2018.
Thank you so much, Alessandra and Aaron, for that great question. Victoria and Elena, take it away.
Okay, so our topic today is diversity in urban education.
I'm Aliana Shiger, and this is just a quick agenda of what we'll be talking about today. So first we're going to go into the benefits of urban education, then challenges, educational resources, and then also Victoria and I's personal experience and impacts throughout this program.
So the benefits of diversity in the classroom, some of them are exposure to different perspectives, and this really helps increase open-mindedness because students are able to understand different opinions from people from different backgrounds. It fosters a sense of empathy and awareness, supports mindfulness and tolerance, and students can celebrate their differences while also being a part of a group. So since students are able to understand where people in different situations are coming from, it promotes group solidarity. It enhances creativity and it prepares students for diversity in the workplace or other environments in life.
sorry, the mute. With benefits come challenges. Some challenges Victoria and I have noticed throughout our semester was access to resources or technology. These resources can be limited and often impossible to attain for many students. From meeting with our other mentors and talking with Victoria, we've noticed that after school programs and activities can be very challenging in urban education. It can be difficult for students to get home safely and ensure that these programs are beneficially adapting to their lifestyles. 3, we have navigating difficult conversations and how to carry out such diverse conversations effectively without having any sorts of tension and making sure everyone's learning some type of beneficial component from it. And then also keeping students engaged. Often students in urban education have diverse populations, and finding ways to keep the students' attention and interest can look different in every classroom. As I know that many of my peer mentors that have adjusted unique lesson plans throughout the semester throughout all the middle schools in the Philadelphia area that we taught at.
So this picture is from one of my favorite Global Smart sessions this semester. On this day, the students had to draft a speech on their assigned topics, so either aiding refugees and displaced people or climate change. And they had to incorporate the UN Sustainable Development Goals into to like help support their argument. So they had to take a position and basically argue using those goals. And after the speech, we facilitated a short questions period so their classmates could, ask them any kind of questions they had about the speech, about their position while using parliamentary procedure. And then we actually gave them some feedback on their public speaking skills, their quality of research, while also, of course, telling them what they did well, and then offering this feedback about those different things, how they could articulate their argument better, just kind of getting them into that speech writing mode and presentation mode. So that was really good to see the type of things that they have been learning from us over the past few weeks and putting it into practice. So now we're going to talk about resources.
So resources, as we mentioned before, technical support's a big one. Every classroom looks different. Some may have a smart board, some may not. Christian may, as she was prepping us, she told us to be aware of like the resources that are in our classrooms. In an increasingly technological world, it can often leave students behind that do not have quick and easy access to computers, including giving teachers the same tools they need. Nonetheless, the knowledge in carrying out tasks through constant changing of these technologies that we find in our everyday life now. Another resource is faculty to staff to student ratio. Personally, my mentor partner and I have observed in our school far more students than teachers on hand. We believe that teachers are an extremely important resource, but can carry out well in numbers, specifically in bigger city schools where you need students who need more of that hands-on attention or one-on-one attention, as we talked a lot throughout the semester about one-on-one attention. Providing diversity on both ends, as mentioned in the challenges, navigating difficult conversations, competes hand in hand with depicting diversity among faculty and staff, as it is shown among the student population. This could stimulate diversity curriculum for both students and teachers and make it more of experiential learning rather than kind of like just a quick chapter in a textbook. And then lastly, we have accessibility or access to remote learning. In specific connection with COVID-19, remote learning is fickle for many across all ages and can be successful or virtually impossible to achieve without some type of monetary support. Some ways schools have combated this transition, I've heard, is providing grab-and-go lunch sites. This helps, feed the children that often only have one meal a day and it's provided from the school already. I know the first presentation mentioned a little bit about the impacts of COVID-19 among students. And a little bit about my personal experience as a mentor throughout the semester. I would say awareness was a big factor. I gained a variety of hands-on experience and recognition to the amount of effort it takes to run programs such as Global Smarts for youth communities. I became very eager to support students. Although Global Smart mentors got to meet numerous times before we entered the classrooms, I found myself being more engaged and eager to support students once entering the classroom and seeing where I can really benefit them. Thirdly is the sense of benefit or educational payoffs. I began to understand the benefits of my position as a mentor. Notice that I am able to support my students because of the hard work I have done throughout my educational experience. Overall, I often forget how much knowledge I learned myself, and I'm able to pass that on to younger generations, which is great. And then my overall reflection, I would say that Victoria and I were very astonished by our mentees' knowledge and determination. Almost after every session that we met with our students, we were surprised by what they knew and how well they did on certain activities that we did or homework assignments. It became very rewarding to guide these students while elaborating on their knowledge and curiosity in public speaking, research, and writing skills within their own communities. And I mean, I think I could speak for Victoria too. I'd be lying if we didn't learn something from them every session too, so.
Oh, sorry. And a little my experience. So I just really enjoyed kind of meeting the students where they are and adjusting to their different levels. Like we said, along with a diverse population, they all come from different areas and also different education levels. We also had a mixed classroom, so we had grades 6th and then 8th. So that was interesting to see. Balancing between the hands-on and hands-off approach. I really wanted to make sure that they're not only just learning from us, but they're also learning from each other, whether that's through brainstorming or drafting a speech together, whatever different activity we had going on that day, just making sure that we're also fostering those relationships within them. So that was really cool to see. Gave me a new passion for teaching. I had no idea what it takes to really engage a classroom full of middle-level students before this experience. So I definitely have a new respect for teaching, especially with global issues. Because they are so important and the kids find it really important as well. And just a new understanding. I was really amazed by the way the students interpreted everything that we were telling them and how they applied their knowledge that they already had. I'm not sure how much I really knew about global issues at that age, but our students really learned a lot and already knew a lot. So that was really inspiring to see. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see a question in the comments from Michael Farrell. So the question is, in your opinion, is it more important to close the technical gap or the challenge of the teacher to student ratio? And either mentor can respond to this question.
I mean, that's a really good question. It's definitely a close call because you need both nowadays. I would say I couldn't pick one over the other, but I would say that the balance between the two is important. I wouldn't say that you would have to fix the technical gap completely and have less teachers, more than like maybe like inch towards some type of program or just overall plan to slowly keep up with the technical advances in the world, while probably recruiting teachers and training faculty and staff to be able to handle students in urban communities. Victoria, did you want to add on to?
Yeah, I think it depends on the students. It's so hard because, like I said, they have all different levels and just in general, students learn best differently. I'm someone who I think definitely does better when I have that that human interaction, I guess. Like say, like even in college, if I am not understanding material well, like I'll do better if I talk it out with a classmate or go to my professor's office hours versus if I look it up and look at some Google summary. And so, it depends on how you learn and sort of what's available to you. So I think, like Aliana said, it is a balance, but I think some students or some communities can really benefit from improving that ratio and giving students that attention and that human interaction. I think that might help their learning more than technology can.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciate that. Okay, we'll now transition to our next presentation. It's going to be our group from A.M.Y Northwest.
Okay, can everyone see that? Okay, good. Hi, my name is Lily Cosgrove, and my partner is Gianna, and when we were reflecting on our experiences as Global Smarts mentors, Gianna brought up a experience she had with diversity in the classroom, and that really got me thinking about my background as a history major and my experiences that I had at A.M.Y Northwest. So I wanted to talk about bias in the classroom and how we can identify and learn from them, but I don't think it's the bias that you'll be thinking about. So what exactly is bias? How can we define it? According to Merriam-Webster, there are several different definitions, but this was the one that I found most relevant. An inclination of temperament or outlook. Usually when we think about bias, we tend to have a negative connotation with it. For example, a racial bias. However, humans will naturally have a bias. Example, you might have a bias, you might prefer chocolate ice cream to vanilla ice cream. And as a history major, one of the first things we do in the classroom is we recognize that a source, whether it be primary or secondary, or a person, will always have a bias. So what place does bias have in the classroom? In my experience as a Global Smarts mentor, in identifying your own biases, this helps you focus on what skills or knowledge you might need to build up in order to give your students a well-rounded lesson or education. Included in this is a multitude of different perspectives, which ties in with diversity, which Gianna will talk about. And something that I also thought about when creating this PowerPoint was what biases might the students have, which I will also talk about in the next slide with my example. So the example that I reflected on in our classroom was we had a lesson about debating and how to form a good, strong argument, and it was about whether the United Nations was an effective organization or not. Now, in preparing for this lesson, I identified my own bias that I do believe the United Nations is an effective organization. So in that, I was able to prepare by learning the other side of the argument, what people think are the problems with the United Nations. And in this, it really helped my students, since when we went to do the debate, they learned something new with the Security Council and how they have a veto power. And as I mentioned, we could identify the bias of an American-centric education. Having the students participate in Model UN already helps with kind of identifying that bias in themselves. But we also I noticed this when we were talking about lower emission Pacific Island countries who emit less to no emissions, and how the students had never thought about that because they usually tend to think of just like in an American education system, we don't really learn about that. So Gianna, I think, is next to talk about diversity.
So we heard a little bit about diversity in the previous presentation. So to define it is kind of difficult because it encompasses so much of a person's identity. It refers to background and personal experiences as well as identities within an individual. So I listed below a couple that are encompassed within individuals, but it really has to do with the experiences and the perspectives that those have. Two individuals who could have seemingly very similar identities could share close to no experiences, therefore having completely different perspectives on the world or on classroom material, policies, etc. And this is so important because in a classroom, there are so many perspectives that we don't often realize. A lot of the identities that people share aren't physical identities that you can identify. A lot are identities within an individual, and that makes it difficult, especially when you're teaching, because you don't always realize the students that you have in your classroom. And developing those relationships are so important because you start to realize that there's more to each of your students than you initially thought. So do you want to go to the next slide?
Yes.
So this is talking about why diversity is so important in the classroom, and we heard about this too in the previous slide. So on top of having a different point of view and sharing empathy for individuals, we recognize the differences between ourselves and others. And in recognizing those differences, we understand a little bit better how we were brought up different, how we have different views, and why that matters. And we can learn so much from realizing that our point of view might not always be the right point of view, if there even really is a right point of view. So then also in connection to the bias that we were talking about earlier, we all make assumptions about everybody. It's hard to walk into a room and not have a knee-jerk reaction as to what you think is going on or whatever kind of energy you feel in the room. Those are real things that all of us do, but it's important to recognize that within ourselves, be self-aware and conscious of these things. And in doing so, we realize that we are making these assumptions, and they often create the biases that we see in the classroom. But when we're aware of them and aware of ourselves, we start to make efforts to do this less. And just acknowledging that they're there at all is the first step in doing so. And like I said, when you can embrace differences, you have a more balanced space. People feel recognized. They feel like they're in an environment where they're safe and they can be heard and they can share their perspectives without being judged or anything like that. So the example that we were talking about earlier was part of the prep conference was for the students to introduce their country in the native language. So my country was Iraq. And initially I was nervous to tell them because they were going to have to speak in Arabic. And having to Google Translate, hi, my name is so-and-so and I'm representing Iraq. For me, that was a really stressful idea because I know no Arabic. Even to look it up on Google Translate, I would be extremely nervous to do that. So we actually forgot to tell them the first week and we told them the second week. And all of a sudden they were so excited. They were like, oh, and they just spit it out. And I was like completely taken aback because I realized, oh, these students actually know Arabic. Like some of them are in their religion, like they see it all the time and they're very used to it and people in their family speak it. And it was an eye-opening moment for me because I realized the assumptions that I'd made based on my students and the diversity that we had in our own classroom. And I was a little ashamed because I had made those assumptions, but I was also really proud of the students for being able to just say what they knew and have total confidence and not be worried about anything. And by the end of it, they were fighting over who was going to be able to say it, and they were like arguing, but they were having such a great time. So that kind of connects like how my bias was played into the classroom and how their diversity was there. But once I had that experience moving forward, I made no more assumptions because I realized I'm not always right, and it's something that we kind of have to learn as teachers too. So that's all that we have. We're just going to wrap up there. That's like the connection between the bias and the diversity that we saw in the classroom.
Thank you so much. Any questions from those that are joining us or fellow mentors? I'll give you a chance while our next group, Cook-Wissahickon, pulls up their presentation. There was a question from Haley, which I'll pull up. What are some ways you encourage your students to identify their biases and be open to learning other perspectives from a place of kindness and tolerance, rather than being closed off to ideas that are contradictory to their own? That's a great question.
So something that we did a lot of times was have them look at the other side of the argument. So for the most part, everybody was in favor of all of the refugee placements. They were like, well, every country should be taking in refugees. Like, that's what you should do. People need this. And we were like, okay, you're right. Like, that's something that's really important. But at the same time, think about it like this. We'd say, what about jobs? What about the economy? What about this, this, and this? And they'd realize, oh, that's something that I hadn't considered. So we weren't doing it in a way that was like, okay, you're wrong. It was a way where we just wanted them to look from a different point of view, from a different country's perspective or something like that. So it wasn't so much saying, okay, like, no, let's think about it like this. It's like, okay, that's part of it. And like, let's look at the bigger picture, because there's more to it than just zooming in on like one puzzle piece. There's the whole thing to look at.
Yeah, we also did that in the whether the United Nations is an effective organization argument or not, because a lot of the students were definitely in favor of the United Nations being an effective organization, and they didn't really want to argue that it wasn't, but we had to gently like prod them and give them facts and information that help that side of the argument.
Can you all explain the title of your presentation?
Yeah, bias and diversity, identifying them and using them in the classroom. I think that just being aware that like they're tools you can use, identifying your own biases, as I said, and your students' biases that they might have, and identifying that the classroom you are going to be in is going to be a diverse classroom, whether it be in skin color or gender relations or religions. No student is going to be completely alike.
So specifically for the learning from them, so like how I said, I learned from my experience. I was like, okay, I'm not going to make that mistake again, because it felt like a mistake to have that assumption of my students. So that's like a way that I learned from them, but also the students learned from their own biases when they were doing the debate, like Lily said. So most of the students were on the one side where the UN was good. And we were like, okay, well, how about some of you go on the other side? Like, you can work with Lily, and then the other students will work with me, and we'll have a better debate because we can talk about it like that. So in encouraging them to look at the other side, they were able to learn, okay, like, I have a bias too, or this is my identity, but somebody else is with a different identity and perspective would see something different from their point of view.
Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, we're going to turn it over now to Mark and Alyssa from Cook-Wissahickon. Take it away.
How's it going, everybody? I'm Mark.
I'm Alyssa.
And today we're going to be talking to you about 3 different topics. I'm going to be presenting about climate change in the Philippines. Alyssa will be presenting after me about the refugee crisis in Uganda. And then we're going to touch a little bit upon our experience at Cook-Wissahickon. So the Philippines is actually ranked the #1 most susceptible nation to climate change, as according to the Global Peace Index. What this means is it's the most susceptible nation to tropical storms, cyclones, tsunamis, and floods. To give a brief example of this, I wanted to highlight Typhoon Haiyan, which was the most detrimental typhoon that the Philippines has experienced. It happened in 2013. It caused 6,300 casualties. It displaced 4 million people, and it cost $2 billion in infrastructure repairs. One important thing to highlight here is that the $2 billion is, at the time in 2013, was 2% of the Philippines' GDP. So that takes a major hit into a revenue source that they could be spending in other places that wouldn't include trying to pick up the pieces and really repair the country again. Instead, they could focus it on other issues like sustainable development. So a big question is, why do climate change events target the Asia Pacific region? Because it's not only the Philippines, it's also Bangladesh, it's also Japan and Indonesia who really experience these, but the Philippines gets hit the most, mostly because of its development and its geography. On average, 20 tropical storms occur in the Philippines, and about half of them make landfall. Since 2006, 5 of the 10 most deadly hurricanes and tropical storms the Philippines has seen have happened in the last 15 years. And this isn't due to bad luck, or this isn't due to chance. It's really the data points out that it's due to the warming of the earth and the warming of the ocean around the Philippines. The Philippines is naturally surrounded by temperate waters, and the hotter the climate gets, the warmer the ocean becomes. So essentially, the water has no chance to cool down, and as it evaporates, it facilitates the opportunity for more storms. Also, the Philippines is made up of 7,000 islands, which makes the infrastructure kind of weak between island to island. And it can be really hard to get supplies from place to place when these events occur. It can be really hard to spring into action and make a rescue team or a support team and deliver vital supplies. There was also a huge problem of deforestation in the 1920s in the Philippines, which is a different topic, but the soil no longer holds as well due to the mangroves being depleted. And when water comes in mass quantities, the country can't really support the influx of water, and this destroys people's homes and livelihoods. So in all, the Philippines is really at the world's mercy. The country needs the world as a whole to hold back on fossil fuels and releasing more carbon emissions into the air to kind of help the cooling of the earth. And then aside from this, an interesting thing that I found out today, due to the coronavirus, as a lot of businesses are becoming more skeptical about investing in China and having their manufacturing in China, a lot of ASEAN countries, which is like a trade union in the Asian region, it consists of Philippines, Vietnam, Cambodia, Japan, and a bunch of other nations. A lot of manufacturing firms are going to look at other opportunities in those countries as opposed to China because of the COVID scare that has happened and affected all of us today.
So while the Philippines is a great country to look at when you're talking about climate change, Uganda is actually a great country to look at when you're talking about refugees. So Uganda actually hosts the most refugees on the continent of Africa and the third most refugees in the world. So they have 1.4 million refugees as of February 2020. And the reason that there are so many refugees in Uganda is because there are a lot of refugees seeking to escape war and violence in the neighboring countries of South Sudan and the DRC, which, if you know, those countries have long struggled with war and violence, and that leads to a lot of their citizens fleeing the country to find safety. And Uganda also has some of the friendliest refugee policies in the world that seek to give refugees basic rights that a lot of countries do not. So as you can see here, over 1 million of the 1.4 million refugees in Uganda come from South Sudan. Most of the rest come from the DRC, and Burundi, Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Sudan have the others. So what is Uganda's refugee policy? So obviously this is from before the COVID-19 crisis. So before that, they had an open door policy where they would let in any refugee who needed safety. As of right now, that has been suspended. They are no longer allowing any more refugees. But within that policy, the government provided plots of land to farm and construct shelters on. The Ugandan government guaranteed freedom of movement, right to employment, education, health, and the right to start a business, which is very generous and not a lot of countries do, especially on the continent of Africa. The UN says about Uganda's refugee policy that it empowers refugees to become economically self-reliant while granting them the same rights that citizens enjoy. And Uganda recognizes that refugees can possess skills that can benefit their host countries. So a lot of these refugees might be doctors, lawyers, they're university educated, and that doesn't change just when they become a refugee. They can actually add to the society in Uganda, and they can be integral parts if they are allowed to be. Some other things, when I did some research on how coronavirus is affecting refugees, is there is now a 30% reduction in relief food that is going to refugees because the funding has gone way down. And an article from The Guardian said that Uganda is requesting $316 million from the UN because of how much the funding for refugees has gone down, and just the sheer number of refugees that they have. They need to have this funding back in order to be able to feed them and make sure that these people are safe and healthy. And finally, we're going to talk about our time at Cook-Wissahickon. Personally, this is one of the best experiences I've ever had. I've had experience in the classroom before, but this classroom, I felt like I formed real bonds with the students. And someone mentioned before that even though we were teaching the kids, they were teaching us. And I felt like that was very true for me, especially because in this program, it was a lot of thinking on the fly. And I had to improvise a lot of the time because plans don't always work out the way you want them to. And it also gave me confidence in public speaking. Like, we were teaching the kids public speaking, but I was also becoming way more comfortable at the front of a room talking about what I need to talk about.
Yeah, I would agree with Alyssa. The one big takeaway I had from this was public speaking. It was actually kind of nice. One of my classes was at 6:30 at night, and I had presentations for that almost every class. And then we would teach at Cook-Wissahickon at around 3:30. So I'd already presented the day before I was going to do my presentation at night for one of my marketing courses. So it worked out really well that way. And definitely kind of reduced my jitters when I would get up and present in front of a room. So that was one big takeaway. And also, I just really liked working with kids. I actually had little experience working with kids before. I had taught before. I taught English in Portugal. It was a pretty cool experience, but that was to adults. So to work with kids and kind of, see their progress and talk to them, and it was a really good and positive experience to help the community that we're all a part of. So I definitely liked my time.
Thank you both so much. Any questions for Alyssa and Mark? I was getting, to all the mentors on right now, I was getting flashbacks to our unpoliced activity, our public speaking activity. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to ask that we go ahead and transition to Shawmont now. If you all are ready to share your presentation, you can screen share it and we'll get going.
All right, so if I could find the present button. So oh my God, I'm completely on the wrong slide. So sorry. Okay, so I'm Kelsey.
And I'm Erin, and we are presenting on educational inequality as well as challenges to education specifically faced by students in many of the global smart schools.
So we wanted to start off today with this quote by Malcolm X. So it says, "Education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for today." And we find that this could not be more true in today's society and economy. So college degrees are more often needed than not to acquire like high-paying jobs, and acquiring a college degree could not be more hard for some students today, which we'll delve into a little bit later. So we wanted to also give a definition about education equality. So I feel like a lot of us have like a general idea what education equality is, but it actually encompasses a lot more than I think some of us think. So it is defined as the unequal distribution of educational and academic resources, which can also include school funding, qualified instructors, faculty, and other employees, which could include counselors and administrators, as well as like academic materials, so books, laptops, etc. So it's not just the ability to go to school or to have a school near you to go to, which obviously is like a really big issue. If you look at the Navajo Nation per se, that's a really massive area of land with few schools to go to, and transportation issues a lot of times discourages and often completely compromises students' abilities to attend school. And that's why the Navajo Nation currently has a 31% dropout rate. So big issue, encompasses a lot. So some challenges that our students face within the Global Smarts program is food insecurity, lack of funding, safety concerns, and limited access to resources. So safety concerns in particular, a lot of our schools happen to be in areas of like higher crime rates, which I think some of our mentors did experience firsthand, and limited access to resources. So actually, when our first interview for Global Smarts to be a mentor, Kristen asked us, like, how are you going to be able to adapt to possibly not having computers in a classroom or even like a smart board? And a lot of these problems are hard to tackle because of the stigma surrounded them, so it's hard to talk about them.
So specifically, some ways that we've seen our schools and communities combating the challenges that Kelsey mentioned include school nutrition programs. I know one of the groups talked a little bit about that earlier, but some students receive free or reduced price meals at school, and that really helps allow them to get the nutrition that they need to develop both mentally through their education and also physically. Another way that these challenges are combated is through programs like Global Smarts, where under-resourced schools are able to have programs run for free where they can enhance their education and have extra support in the classroom, for example, through the mentors like myself and Kelsey. And this really helps give a global perspective for the students, as well as helps them with their more central related skills in class. Another important resource is teacher support. Our teacher, Ms. Banazak, allowed students to come to class a little bit early in case they needed help preparing for class or with questions, or to use some of the resources that she had in her classroom. So even though there are a lot of challenges that are faced, we've also seen a lot of really positive experiences with our students, whether it's specifically related to Global Smarts or not. One of these includes the school improvement projects that we saw at Shawmont, in which students did a research project about the school and presented on one thing that they would like to improve. So this wasn't through Global Smarts, but it was something that we saw the students have hanging up in the classroom. And it was really inspiring to see students identify issues in their own school and work to improve them. One example of this would be to create a quiet mental health room where students experiencing mental illness or like depression would be able to go and get support from fellow students who had had similar experiences. Another great thing we saw was peer-to-peer encouragement, where students would help each other with their research and would encourage each other in their public speaking. If someone was nervous, you could hear a student say, "Kaylee, you've got it. Just pretend you're talking to me." Another highlight was seeing out of classroom engagement, where students would hear about something that interested them, go home and learn more about it, and then bring their new findings back to the classroom, which was really exciting. Obviously, with COVID-19, there have been a lot of changes that were unexpected. And with those changes come new challenges, or challenges that look a little bit differently. So we're going to speak on that as well. So again, food security is an issue, but kind of in a different way with COVID-19, because students weren't able to get food at school. And to combat this challenge, as I believe it was McGenna mentioned earlier, there have been places to pick up food for students to get and bring home. Another newly faced challenge is access to the internet, because a lot of students don't have Chromebooks at home or internet access. And additionally, student support, specifically students with learning disabilities or students on IEPs, they could not receive the same support at home necessarily as they could at school. So to combat these newly faced challenges, as I mentioned a moment earlier, there has been food distribution, as well as...
My screen froze, I'm sorry. Are we still on the...
We're on the next slide.
We're on the combating slide.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I can...
So,
okay.
As I mentioned a minute ago, I know Kelsey's screen is frozen, but the food insecurity has been addressed with food distribution. Internet access has been addressed with the Chromebook program, where students specifically at Shawmont have been able to go to their schools to pick up Chromebooks to bring home to borrow during this time, as well as teachers have been very flexible in their assistance to students.
So just to add on to that, so the School District of Philadelphia has been working in collaboration with charter schools as well as the Housing Authority to provide some of those services. So as far as the food distribution, they've been providing grab-and-go meals for a lot of students, which is a huge help for, I'm sure, a lot of students in our program. And they also were responsible for the Chromebook program. We just kind of want to note that like these are actions that have been taken by the schools, like coming together to kind of tackle these problems. So it really just shows how communities can help close that gap in educational inequality. Okay, tell me what slide we're on because which slide is currently on the screen?
Right now it says the newly faced challenges still.
Okay. What about now? I'm sorry, y'all.
I think it's still frozen.
Okay, cool. I'm just gonna try to refresh because I don't really know what's going on.
But that was the majority of our presentation. I already mentioned the combating new challenges.
Okay, all right, so we just have our last little slide. So to bring this kind of full circle, so we want to really emphasize our stance on why education is the gateway to global citizenship. And actually, I don't even really like the word gateway. I think key is more of an appropriate term. Because it's not guaranteed that all of our students in the Global Smarts program are going to go into global affairs or diplomacy. A lot of them, we'll see a lot of our students go into STEM or business or the arts or wherever their passions might take them. But it's all about providing the tools for them to discover these new interests and passions. And this is why Global Smarts is so important in closing those inequalities, because we essentially get to introduce them to new potential interests and passions and career options, which is really a beautiful thing. So yeah, thank you guys.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, guys. I know we had a question that was actually answered, I think, in one of your sections. Does anyone else have any questions for this group before we move on to the next? I'll give you a second to type your question into the chat bar here. Okay. All right, we'll now have a New Foundations Charter School. If you all want to bring up your presentation.
It says it. I'm not allowed to. I don't know.
Jack, can you pull it up at all? I'm wondering if maybe there's a issue on Lauren's end.
Yeah, let me see.
Yeah, it says like my security and privacy on my computer won't let me.
Oh, that's strange.
I think it's because we hand them into the Google Classroom, because I remember I had like kind of a similar issue finding mine. I would just try search, like I don't know if this is helpful, but like try searching it in the drive like under your specific name, because everyone's presentation came up when I looked for mine.
Okay. Oh, I think I may have gotten it.
Hey, there it is.
Can I see that?
Yeah, we've got it now.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Lauren Appleby, and through the Global Smarts program, I was able to study the country of Peru.
And my name is Jack Mostow, and I was the mentor for the delegates of Denmark at New Foundation School.
Yeah, so like Jack said, we had the privilege to be placed in the New Foundation School and work in collaboration with our faculty advisor, Miss Fox, and then 16 other like really incredible students. And we really wanted to take this time to reflect upon our experience and the biggest takeaways that we have gained. So we've identified 5 reasons why this experience is so invaluable.
Okay, so first, the Global Smarts Mentoring Program, it's like taking an upper division political science class while also having an internship. So for the course part of it, we were learning about topics of global significance while also utilizing the skills of writing, reading, intensive research skills, and a lot of that we would learn in the classroom at St. Joe's in political science classes. But what made it unique is that we learned all that in not your average or typical classroom setting. And then simultaneously, we had the professional responsibilities that come with an internship, such as lesson prepping, attending the classroom on Monday afternoons, being in the World Affairs Council on Fridays. And so I think the combination of those two makes this experience so invaluable. And a lot of people would benefit, a lot of St. Joe's or Temple students would benefit from it as well. Also, so Global Smarts, like I mentioned, it's technically a 5th academic class, but I think we both think that being successful goes way beyond whatever the letter grade you get. So for Lauren and I, we predicated our success on progress. So basically, we're the students better off at the end than where we started. Specifically, how did writing and public speaking improve for them? And I think this is important because ultimately the program is not about us. It's about the mentees. It's about the students in the classroom. So while it was unfortunate that we could not see how well they could do at the final conference and how we could ultimately measure that success, I think throughout the semester, what Global Smarts has done for us is given us an opportunity to chase a more tangible goal. And I think this is invaluable because having this like tangible motivation for a tangible goal is really what you need to succeed in the professional world.
Okay, so I wanted to speak upon the mentor-mentee relationship that we've created with the students, because this is what I personally found to be the most meaningful part of the program. So in Ms. Fox's introductory email, she described our students as a motley crew of 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students. So knowing this, Jack and I both really wanted to go into the program with an open mind, really not having any expectations for them and getting to know themselves on our own. So that was part of our effort and open communication, that we needed to make the deliberate effort to know the students by asking engaging questions, and that ultimately would create that comfortable learning environment. So we wanted to show them that while we could have fun with the program and joke around with them, we would also have to take things serious and accomplish the goals that we have set out to achieve. Going along with that, we also kind of wanted to show that we could be vulnerable with them first. So kind of just like prompting conversations and make them more comfortable to find confidence in themselves when they speak, no matter the topic of the conversation. We also found this really impacted their quality of learning. So harboring relationships that have a healthy balance between fun and serious really allowed the students to thrive. And our faculty advisor, Ms. Fox, even had shared her own personal experience that she used to be uptight, which for any of you that have had the privilege to meet her, she is anything but that. And she's found that to be really helpful, and that the students get more out of the course or her personal courses. So we kind of tried to implement that into our activities too. And then also, a lot of people have talked about this already, but this whole process not only was for like a grade for us and the students to be able to go to the final conference, but it was an area for us to mutually grow together. And this proved to us that being present in conversation and learning from others is the most valuable thing we can really do in experience. Okay. So for professional development, obviously, the students really helped their public speaking skills, and it also helped ours. So I know a couple people touched on this, but the experience that we had was very like impromptu. So we may have had lesson plans, but obviously nothing is really going to go like the way it is. So we kind of had to think on our feet. It also really gave us confidence in presenting in front of them. In terms of preparedness, this experience showed us that we're not really being held accountable for just ourselves, but we're also accountable for our students. And they were kind of counting on us to know what to do and kind of fill them in on those things. So experiencing this type of dependency is crucial for when we also go into the workforce and we have to collaborate with other colleagues. So I think it was important to get that experience now. In terms of adaptability, middle school students are very unpredictable. So we really had to, I guess, expect the unexpected and prepare for circumstances, kind of making it appear that we had everything together, even though we had those moments of uncertainty. In terms of gaining different perspectives, I feel like we've all come accustomed to like being the students, obviously, in a classroom and never really had that experience to teach. So I have a newfound appreciation for teachers, professors, all of that, because you kind of understand now those awkward silences in conversations, and you have to fill that void and like think on your feet and prompt the conversation. And also something that we found really important was transparency, and keeping an open line of communication and how important it is, whether that was with our co-mentor, our students, our faculty advisor, or the World Affairs Council. And through this, even now with the coronavirus kind of throwing things all into a mess, we've been able to talk with the students over a Google Hangout, I think that's what it's called. But Jack and I have been able to talk to them, kind of get their updates and all that, which I really think stems from the open communication that we had in the classroom previously.
So finally, one of the most important things I think we learned about was that the opportunity to work collaboratively with a co-mentor was just such a unique experience. One, because at St. Joe's, professors assign group papers and presentations throughout their courses, but hardly do you ever get the opportunity to work with one person like collaboratively throughout the entirety of the semester. So I think that is definitely something to take away. Also, specifically, I think Lauren and I were fortunate to be paired with one another, right, Lauren? Just because, but yeah, all jokes aside, I think what was so special about our co-mentorship was our honesty. So for instance, I can recall so many times when we were lesson planning and either I said this to Lauren or Lauren said this to me, like, I don't like that idea, or I don't think that idea is going to be effective in the classroom. There was never any barrier or any fear of hurting the other person's feelings. And so I think a big takeaway is that honesty is so important in a work environment and in a professional setting, because it will help foster better ideas and therefore foster better outcomes.
Okay, so as we come to the close of our presentation, we also wanted to take this time to give a quick shout out to our 16 amazing students. Although the semester didn't play out the way we had expected, they really worked hard, and they really gave us an experience better than we could have imagined. And we also, we had tried making a video, but the students didn't really understand when we were trying to tell them that. So this picture is gonna serve for that.
We'd also be remiss if we didn't thank or shout out Miss Fox, but also Shanti, Kristen, and Eric, and everyone from the World Affairs Council, our co-mentors, and of course, Professor McCahill. So thank you for your time, everyone.
Thank you so much. For the sake of time, I'm going to ask that you all type your questions into the chat as the presentation is going. Does anyone have a quick question for the new foundations group before we transition to Gesu? Oh, I love that question, Haley. So Haley asked, if you had one piece of advice for future mentors, what would it be?
Okay, so I guess I'll start. I honestly, well, Jack and I were fortunate enough to know each other before, but even if we didn't, I think what he described in his slide is creating like a mentorship that was really significant, like that you guys could talk and have an open line of communication that was genuine. I really think that's important because that kind of shows to the students, and that makes it so much more meaningful. So even if we hadn't known each other, I think making that effort between the mentors would be really important.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I would probably say, I guess my best advice would be to stay organized, but also take pride in trying to improve the students, because it makes the experience more worth it, and try to have fun while doing it.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better, Jack and Lauren. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, we're going to move on to our second to last group here. We've got Gesu. I see your screens coming up perfectly, so go ahead and take it away.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Koenig, and I had the privilege of researching Syria with my students at the Gesu School.
My name is Zach Dobinson. I had the honor of researching the country of Cameroon with my students at Gesu.
And my name is Catherine Hajnowski, and my assigned country was Poland. We are presenting on climate change today, an honest and timely analysis. So we're going to be looking at our 3 assigned countries. Then we're going to compare and contrast the issue of climate change and political matters, such as through Democratic and Republican lenses. And then we're also going to look at how COVID-19 has played a huge role in climate change. So like I said, we're going to be looking at our 3 assigned countries of Syria, Cameroon, and Poland. So from 2006 to 2011, Syria has experienced varying weather patterns and the worst droughts in its history. So these droughts has caused major impacts on Syria's agriculture. So many farmers in Syria have had to migrate to other areas and are in search of employment. However, Syria has taken initiative, and after the Earth Summit in 2012, Syria revised its constitution, stating that it is the states' and citizens' responsibility to care for the environment. Cameroon has also been experiencing harsh droughts in its northern regions, as well as sea levels are rising in the southwestern coastal regions and are already under the flood watch. So many people are being displaced because these coastal regions are flooding and they are seeking shelter in other areas. Lastly, Poland has been suffering from high variability of weather and fluctuations in the course of seasons. So they're having a lot of droughts as well, and hurricanes and even tornadoes. And since the Baltic Sea is bordering in the north of Poland, Poland has noticed that the sea levels have risen dramatically over the past few years.
Thanks, Kat. So now we're going to take a look at climate change, kind of utilizing the theme and the mission statement of the World Affairs Council that democracy demands discourse. So we're going to look at how both Democrats and Republicans kind of view and approach climate change here in the United States. So first, looking at the Republicans, in the past, Republican leaders have been adverse to the idea of climate change, and Republicans themselves have denied climate change. And still today, only 31% of Republican adults see it as a major threat to the United States. But however, also today, you'll see here on the next slide that there are varied viewpoints within the Republican Party about climate change and what the government should be doing. You can see that the more moderate Republicans and those younger in the party are definitely more inclined to want to address the climate change issue. And this has led to responses and plans by Republican leadership on how to address and deal with climate change. One of those coming from a Republican representative from Texas, Dan Crenshaw. And his plan really emphasizes investing in technology known as carbon capture, where this technology literally captures or takes carbon dioxide from the air, from the environment, and recycles it. And so kind of reducing its deleterious effects. And then the other part of his plan, he also really does see natural gas to have benefits, and that shouldn't be completely thrown to the wayside, as it's a fossil fuel that doesn't harm the environment and doesn't release as much carbon as other fossil fuels. Then the other major plan coming out of the Republican Party is coming from Baker, Schultz, and Halstead. It's James Baker and George Shultz, both served in the administration of Reagan. And so it's a Republican plan, but they released it as really a bipartisan solution. And so it definitely emphasizes using the market, and it's called the Baker-Schultz Carbon Dividends Plan. And so effectively, their idea is that using carbon pricing, where you put a fee on every unit of carbon dioxide that a company or industry releases, and the government accumulates that money in those fees, and then they directly give any money that they earn through this carbon pricing to American families in the form of carbon dividends. And their goal is that it would encourage like a positive relationship and feeling in Americans' minds in regard to fighting climate change and clean energy. And then on the Democratic side, there's definitely a large majority, and there's definitely a consensus that one, climate change is a major threat, and two, the federal government needs to do more, as 88% of adults in the Democratic Party see it as a threat, and 90% think the government needs to do more and take more action. And you'll see that these convictions are expressed in their major plans and approaches to resolving the climate issue. One, in the Green New Deal, which was released in 2019 and authored by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which stated as goals global net zero emissions by 2050. And also, interestingly, the Democratic Party, especially in the Green New Deal, looks at how climate change brings about social justice issues and trying to resolve those issues, as those on the margins and those in coastal communities are most affected by climate change. And then finally, the Biden plan, which was released by Vice President Biden, the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party, kind of uses the Green New Deal as a framework and works off of it, wanting the US to reach net zero emissions, again, focusing on the social justice issues surrounding climate change, wanting to recommit to the Obama era's commitment to the Paris Agreement. And then unlike the Republicans, the Democrats definitely do emphasize more so using government funding, both on the federal, state, and local level, upwards of $6.7 trillion to fight climate change.
So additionally, given the current pandemic, I've been like closely following this, like these two topics, like in the news, especially together. And from what I've seen, I felt that this should also be part of the presentation because there's been very significant results and very interesting results at the same time. So it's like the good and the bad, and these are just very like brief generalizations for the sake of the presentation. But the good, like due to like extensive lockdowns and a reduction like factory use, like especially in areas like the US and China, very heavily industrialized areas, air quality is actually very noticeably improving, and to the point that these effects have done years worth of work in literally just, in some cases, 1 month, and in most cases just a couple months. But the bad that this has, some of the bad that this has exposed is that the strain on current health systems has exposed the quality and responsiveness of these systems. And the reason why that kind of plays into our presentation is that those most affected by COVID-19 on average live in areas with heavy pollution. Please. So pollution and COVID-19. So these are both, the first quote is from an Apple News article that I found about a Journal of American Medical Association study. And so that air pollution can cause hypertension, diabetes, and respiratory diseases, conditions that doctors are starting to link to higher mortality rates for COVID-19. And among those in the study that died from COVID-19, 57% of them had hypertension. And so that kind of factors into what some like leaders are seeing. And so the second quote is saying that the air may be clearing in Italy, but the damage has already been done to the human health and people's ability to fight off infection. And so the quote also goes on to saying that, yes, we should be responding to COVID-19, but we should also then be saying, how could we have done better in prepping for another pandemic in a sense? So yes, we may be stopping the pandemic in a sense, but what about everything else and everything else that it's caused that is not explicitly the pandemic? Next, please. And so this graph is, so on the left side of your screen, it's obviously an aerial view of China of the NO2 nitrous dioxide density over it. And on the left, that's just from January in 2020. And then on the right is February. And that's just from when they shut down a lot of their factories to stop the spread of the coronavirus. And just due to them closing their factories, compare January and February of 2020 compared to that same time frame in 2019, there was an overall 40% drop in NO2 levels over China. Next slide, please. And this is just kind of to bring it a little closer to home as well. It's the same concept. So on the left, you have on average the levels of NO2 density over the US Northeast. And it's on average from March from 2015 to 2019. And on the right, you see the average from March of this year. So while it's not as drastic of an increase as the one from China, however, this is a 30% difference between these two photos. And this was just another thing that I was debating about adding because I wasn't sure if I'd had the time to add it. But another thing I wanted to point out, another personal note was, I've had the great pleasure of being able to go to Venice twice now, once when I was 11 and once when I was 17. And I came across a couple articles talking about how clear the canals are in Venice, which is a great part of like their livelihood there. And if I didn't see photos from like CNN or like BBC or like reliable news sources, I seriously would have thought they were photoshopped, because between my 2 points in seeing those canals, they only got worse. So the fact that they were literally clear was, I literally did not believe it, if I'm being honest. But.
Thank you all so much. Any questions for the Gesu group? Feel free to type in the chat at this time. And we'll have our next group, last but certainly not least, St. Gabriel, pull up their presentation. Okay, I see a question coming in from Alessandra. The question is, do you think the drastic changes in emissions will prompt legislative or long-term changes?
I can start with that. So from my personal opinion, do I wish that world leaders would seize this opportunity that, in my opinion, is as close to a restart or a do-over in terms of like helping our climate that we're going to get? As much as I wish they would, I seriously, at least do not believe enough power players will. And for example, I mean, China, who's very heavily reliant on their industrial sectors. Again, I hope that they'll be able to see, like I said, that was like 1 month difference in the case of China. So I do hope they see the opportunity that when we do take like these drastic efforts, and like that we actually will see drastic change. So personally, I hope so, but I wouldn't really feel comfortable saying yes or no.
Yeah, absolutely, Zach. Okay, thank you so much to the group from Gesu. We're going to move to our final presentation for today, St. Gabriel.
Okay, hi guys.
Hello. Wait, hold on. So I'm Julia Oliger.
I'm Maddie DeMarco.
And yeah, we're going to do the impact of Global Smart's mentoring program. We were with St. Gabriel School.
So first, we're just going to throw out a definition. So impact is having a strong effect on someone or something. And so we're going to be talking about how Global Smarts has impacted us personally as co-mentors, and how Global Smarts mentoring program impacted our students.
So how Global Smarts impacted us personally?
So for me, just in regards to personal growth, I think I can speak for Julia too on this one. We learned how to strategize and problem solve. This is a lot of like thinking on the spot things. So if a lesson plan wasn't working, or an activity wasn't as engaged, like the kids weren't as engaged, we would think on the spot and accommodate to that. And we also learned how to cope with different situations as they rose too. I also gained a different sense of awareness. I know a lot of the time St. Joe's were living in a bubble on campus, and exploring a different part of Philadelphia, like Grace Ferry, opened my eyes to a different environment. And I also became more knowledgeable in international relations and how the world is really all interconnected, and the world's a lot smaller than I used to think it was. So in regards to my country, Russia, and Julia's country, Egypt, we grew and learned more about those.
So yeah, for mine, my personal growth was definitely in improv and confidence. My attitude going into a session every week was fake it till you make it. I would be preparing all week before a session, but I knew from every session and like every time I was with my students that sometimes they would just say things completely out of left field that I couldn't have prepared for and didn't even think about because I wasn't 12. And so knowing that, okay, I have this information and thinking about different ways to guide the conversation back to United Nations or whatever we were learning that day, but knowing that you have to go in with a smile on your face, and if you seem like you know what you're talking about and you're confident with them, they will be more, our students were more receptive to what we were saying and how just to think on our feet. I definitely appreciated the connections that we made with our students. I loved St. Gabe's. We had 12 students. So I was able to I spent a lot of time memorizing their names and watching how the students interacted with each other to learn how best to facilitate discussions and know, okay, these people work really well together. So how can we get them to work well together and in a bigger setting, even if they're not partners? And I became more knowledgeable on the responsibilities of the United Nations. Throughout this program, the United Nations and countries became more personal to me, and focusing on the responsibilities each person has rather than country borders and the idea of like, well, this is my space and this is what I take care of, and going bigger than that. Like, no, we should take care of everyone.
So next we're going to be talking about how Global Smarts impacted us as co-mentors. So Julie and I, unlike Jack and Lauren, did not know each other beforehand, and I went into Global Smarts thinking I knew everyone because most of us are political science majors and sophomores, but then when I got paired with Julie, I had no idea what she was, who she was, sorry. Like forming a relationship with a stranger wouldn't be possible without constant communication, so Julie and I talked all the time throughout this, way before we even met at the World Affairs Council in the spring semester. Communication followed us through the whole program. If I had a really busy week with outside activities or a stressful week, Julia would pick up more of the slack or like vice versa. So we always were showing up to St. Gabe's with 100% combined and to show up for our students like that. We also collaborated really well. So Julia is a communications major, so she did more of the website design and kept that updated. Well, since I work at the Kinney Center at St. Joe's, I do a lot of lesson plans. So I did a lot of the lesson plans and we collaborated within those too. So we worked on our skills together. And then we also were able to reflect together. So whether that be before a session, after a session, before Friday professional development sessions too, Julie and I had a lot of car time together. So we got to talk about not only just Global Smart stuff, but we got to know each other really well. And I think it made for us to like walk into those classrooms more prepared, and since we knew each other.
So how Global Smarts impacted us with our students. Trying to befriend and mentor our middle school students was really interesting. We focused definitely on the trust that we had with them and how we formed our relationships and related information to them and ourselves to them, especially with the first few sessions. When we first walked in, they kind of were like, who are you guys? What are you doing here and why? They were just very not with it. And I think our icebreaker really helped make our relationship more comfortable. But Maddie and I definitely took on the role of leading by example. And so if our students were as engaged or didn't understand an activity or were embarrassed, especially with the Police and some of the other games we had to improve their public speaking, Maddie and I were extremely willing to be like, okay, we'll go first. Like we'll make an example of ourselves and you guys can laugh at us and see how it can go. So then everyone will feel more comfortable and fully understand that this was a learning space. This was a space for, it's okay if you make a mistake. It's okay if you don't understand, because we're all here to learn and figure it out together. Luckily, our class size was 12, like I said before. So we were able to give a lot of time to our students. And if somebody needed personal help or needed more time with certain activities, we were able to give our 100% while the other person would take care of the room and kind of walk around and constantly engaging with our students. Maddie and I definitely became better mentors the more that we learned about them. And we had 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, so a lot of them knew each other and had prior relationships. So when we walked in, we really tried to watch how they were and grow from that and kind of join their environment when we would go.
So now we're just going to be talking about the inequality and lack of access we saw at St. Gabe's. So both our experiences and then also some demographics about the area.
So with our experiences, we had a young teacher who had a very good relationship with her students, Miss Torelli. But when we went to the initial prep conference, both Miss Torelli and the students were pretty nervous. There was definitely a pressure for our students to perform well, and even our students recognized some of the differences they had from themselves and other students at the conference. And I feel like the sessions leading up to and our prep conference was probably the most trust we showed in our relationship with our students, because it was kind of like we were there as a team. Like, no matter what, we're in your corner, we're here for you. You need help with something, you have a question, like, look to us, because we're going to be there, like, ready to help out. It was a really interesting experience at the prep conference, kind of just so our students could have a better understanding as to what they were walking into with our supposed final conference, if we had it.
Yeah, to add on to that, just the prep conference in general, and then also leading into like COVID and not being able to see our kids, it's definitely been a challenge because the kids at St. Gabe's most of the kids at St. Gabe's have a lack of access to technology. So communicating that with them and Ms. Torelli has been an obstacle because not all of the students have that access to technology to be able to continue to interact with us. So that is a big problem. And then going into the demographics of the area that's surrounding St. Gabe's. St. Gabe's is in Grace Ferry, and just a little bit of like preliminary research I did on the median household income is $24,901, and then also 8% of people living in Grace Ferry hold a bachelor's degree, and that speaks a lot to our experience with the kids knowing about school and like higher education. So, for example, not everyone knew where St. Joe's was or what St. Joe's was, and for school, like it's pretty close to St. Gabe's, so it shows that their education and where they're growing up is a lot different from others. So yeah, and here are some pictures. So yeah, that's our presentation.
Oh, thank you so much, St. Gabriel. That was fantastic. Any final questions for the St. Gabriel team? Feel free to put them in the chat. And thanks, everyone. I know we're running a couple minutes over, but we had such great presentations. I didn't want to cut any of them short by any means if we didn't have to. I love that. Yeah, how do we think we can improve access to kids like those that are at St. Gabe's?
I think local level policy could be really important. I know St. Gabe's isn't public. I'm forgetting what type of school St. Gabe's is, but I think having that policy change where during times like this, St. Gabe's students can bring their computers home, because I know they have some computers in the classroom, but I don't know if it's enough for everyone to have one, that type of thing. So I think policy change is the most efficient way.
And I also think continuing programs like this one and other smaller programs to reach St. Gabe's and kind of engage the students outside of their environment and more interaction with other Philadelphia schools and programs and educational opportunities.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks for that. Well, that does conclude our presentations for today. Anyone that is joining us outside of the Global Smarts Mentoring Program, thank you so much for joining us today, and you can hop off the session now if you'd like to. I just have a couple final notes, and then we'll kind of dismiss for this afternoon with everyone else. So I'm going to share a quick note in the chat. that Michael Farrell, chairman of the board for the World Affairs Council, sent to me. It was a really lovely note that he wanted me to pass on to all of you. So if you can just take a second to read that, thanking you all for your commitment and dedication, especially during this very challenging time. I want to share one last thing with you all, and just a quick note for the evaluations. Shanti will follow up with you all by email. It's a very short Google form that we just want to get some final sort of anecdotal remarks from you all about your experience with us this semester. So she'll share that with you all by email, and you can fill that out at any point next week. So let's see here if I can share this last thing with you all. So I came across this really interesting post the other day, and it made me kind of think of you all. It says that, you know, not every teacher lives in conditions they want broadcasted to their coworkers or students over video conferencing. Not every teacher can afford to buy out a craft store to convert their living room into a learning wonderland. Not every teacher has the bandwidth, literally or otherwise, to become an online instructor overnight. Not every teacher can put their health at risk to pass out work packets or meals to families in need. Not every teacher works in neighborhoods that you can parade through. I'm sure you've all been seeing a lot of those images on social media right now and kind of wondering, well, what would that look like for our students? Not every teacher has the in-home support to balance being a caregiver, instructor, chef, tutor, and tech support all day. But the one thing every teacher, and I think all of our teachers in the Global Smarts mentoring program are doing at this time, is trying. Through pandemics, technology breakdowns, revolving expectations, and unknown unknowns, we keep trying and we keep teaching. So if you feel like you are not every teacher, principal, para, librarian, mentor, or counselor, please know this: while your daily diligence may not go viral, the work you do every day is vital. So thank you so much, everyone, for the work that you've done over the course of this semester and throughout all of these challenges. Shanti, do you have some final remarks that you want to say to everyone before we dismiss today?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank all of you for the amazing work that you have done, your commitment to your students, and also the program during these unprecedented times has been really remarkable to see. Just echoing again what Kristen has said and a lot of people have said, I know the transition home has not been easy, and also not being able to meet with your students face to face. However, you kept looking for ways to continue to support your students, and during this disruption that was caused by the pandemic, you were able to be part of the solution, which that in itself is huge. You were able to provide students with educational resources, materials, and support that they otherwise wouldn't have had access to. So thank you so much, and thanks for your commitment and your passion to helping out with these students, and just, you know, being there for them and continuing to support them even though you're not meeting with them face to face every week. So thank you so much. It's been amazing to work with all of you.
Okay, absolutely. Okay, with that, I do want to end our session for today. I feel like I need a gavel. You know, are there any?
Oh, I have mine. I have mine. 1 second. 1 second. 1 second.
Any motions on the floor to close today's Global Smarts meeting? I see a couple of hands, a couple seconds. With that, we are formally adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for a great semester. Molly, if you want to give us a little back there, we'll. Nice. All right, guys, stay in touch, please. You know, obviously, we've got a couple of deadlines that some of your teachers might be working on in the next couple weeks. Stay in touch with Shanti and I. We're here. So best of luck, guys, and have a great weekend.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
so much.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. This was really meaningful.
Yeah, same.
Okay.
Especially in the midst of all the craziness.
Yeah, oh my God, it's crazy. All right, well, take care, guys.
Bye.